Hello, I am Raider. I'm currently known as the best Darius in the world. In this video, you're going to learn about runes, which summoner spells to take, and why. The proper itemization on Darius in various scenarios, and how to pilot Darius throughout the game, and finally, we are going to touch up on matchups for the champion. I can promise by the end of this video, you will have higher knowledge on Darius, and a new perspective on how to play him. I have been a challenger for almost 7 years, and my ranked achievements is what sets me apart from other Darius players. I've gotten Season 12 Rank 10 EU West, 14-16 LP. In Season 13, I took most of the year off due to a hand injury, so I was mostly inactive, but I still managed to get 2 accounts to 1000 LP Challenger. In Season 14, I got Rank 4, 1261 LP EU West. Season 15, Rank 1 EU West. I also went to Korea twice during Season 15. The first attempt, I managed to get 1626 LP, rank 17. Then on the second one, I managed to make it to rank 2, 1998 LP, which was historically the highest peak ever made by a foreign top laner, and the previous one was held by TF Blade at rank 3. And the only reason I did it is because I managed to make a breakthrough in making Darius an all-around useful champion in every draft, which I will talk about in the video. And as of Season 16, I have already achieved rank 1 EU West once again, reaching 2013 LP, and I've reached rank 1 EUNE 2443 LP with an 83% win rate. I am the most consistent Darius and also one of the most consistent and best solo queue top laners of today's time, and I will give you guys as much of an insight as I can into how I play this champion. On Darius, there are 2 set of rune pages I go with depending on the matchups. Conquer, Triumph, Alacrity, and Last Stand on the first page, since they all complement the way you want to play Darius the best. Triumph gives you HP in close 1v1 battles or in teamfights in order to live longer to ult more people. Alacrity gives you attack speed for faster stacking, and Last Stand, since it takes you too long to get your stacks in most cases, it will be lower HP as well, so you get the most value out of it in most cases. When it comes to the secondary page, I generally run Sorcery Tree and always Celerity and Nimbus Cloak, and I do this mainly because in Season 16 we gained an extra summoner spell which is Teleport. So when we run Flash and Ghost, we also have a Teleport with a 7-minute cooldown, and basically Nimbus Cloak gives you more movement speed the higher the cooldowns of the spells are. So it will allow you to enter fights at really high speeds, making it easier for you to get on top of someone. And also Celerity, any bonus movement speed is always appreciated for Darius, but it works well with Home Guard since it was buffed this season, so the further the wave is in the lanes, the longer we'll have that movement speed buff, and since we'll run that much, Celerity also gives us movement speed during that. I used to run Resolve second in Season 15, but after the nerfs to second wind and after sorcery value increased in Season 16, I use the Resolve tree way less often. I usually only use it for matchups where bone plating is absolutely required, such as Set or matchups that have intense levels of poke, and having sorcery movement speed wouldn't change the matchup, such as Jace, Quinn, etc. Now comes the interesting part of the guide, which is the second set of runes that I use on Darius, which would be Sorcery Tree as primary with Phase Rush, Nimbus Cloak, Celerity, and Gathering Storm, followed with Precision Tree as a secondary with Triumph and Alacrity. Phase Rush is basically a temporary ghost for Darius, which allows him to stick easier onto the target he is fighting without having to waste Flash or Ghost. Nimbus Cloak, as explained earlier, works well with Darius summoner spells, and any form of extra speed is appreciated, same goes for Celerity. And Gathering Storm, we take it to make up for the lost AD that would be missing from not running Conquer. And when it comes to Alacrity and Triumph, again, Alacrity gives you attack speed, which is always good on Darius for stacks, and Triumph heals you in close fights. Now some of you would be wondering why am I saying this as if it's new, since some people have already introduced using Phase Rush into ranged matchups before. Well, that is what I use it for as well. I also realized that this rune page can be used into almost every single draft. I generally use Phase Rush into drafts that I find it very hard to hit anyone, like drafts composed of mostly ranged champions, or champions that are incredibly mobile, especially when my team lacks CC or an engaged support. You can also use Phase Rush into specific matchups that are easier to play with on this rune, due to the nature of how the champion can play, but if you want to learn more about this, you can check out my guide on Patreon. There you will find a written form of this guide that will also include every matchup for Darius and what runes, summoners, and items to run. And how to play each matchup specifically, click the link in the description to find out more. To quickly summarize the section, the easiest way to look at how to decide between Conquer and Phase Rush, I usually usually go Conqueror into drafts that have 2 to 3 melee champions or better set in scenarios where I just feel like I'm going to have a lot of chances to hit champions without issues, or if I have good setup for my team. And I usually go Phase Rush into drafts that I find annoying to play as Darius, for instance, if they have a lot of mobility or dashes or just a lot of ranged champions and disengage tools to get away from me, and especially when I don't have any setup from my side, then I consider going Phase Rush. I also like this rune into most ranged top laners. Alright, let's get into the summoner spells on Darius. When it comes to using Conqueror runes on Darius, I always run Flash Ghost regardless of matchups or drafts, since the Conqueror route makes us way less mobile and we're more reliant on movement speed, so trading Ghosts or Flash specifically for anything in the long run is going to be a liability. However, when it comes to Phase Rush Darius, we have way more options. Phase Rush helps Darius in the mid to late game more, so in most cases in matchups I'm kind of forced to go Flash plus Ignite to make up for the weaker early game for not running Conqueror. Also, some matchups require me to go Exhaust, who rely heavily on a burst combo like Riven, Urgot, etc. The only type of lanes I go Flash Ghost with Phase Rush are mostly ranged lanes, or lanes that are free regardless of summoner spells, but you're also free to play with Ignite in the easier lanes, since the build with Phase Rush gives us enough movement speed and tools to work with, and we will get into that in the items section. Now, let's talk about items for Darius, which is also the most important part of this guy, since good itemization will make it easier for you to pilot the champion in team fights and separate you from the average Darius. When it comes to starting items on Darius, I usually go Doran's Blade into matchups where I plan to do an early all-in, which are mostly melee matchups, but I also run Doran's Shield in matchups where I'll be mostly short trading or if I'm playing into a ranged champion with a lot of poke. Now let's get into the core items. There are 3 main core items that you will be building. Stridebreaker, which I usually run in most cases when I'm running Conqueror, since it's the all-around best item for Darius in my opinion. It gives you a better wave clear, a good active ability that speeds you up and slows others down and fits the way Darius likes to fight the best. Trinity Force, which I go in drafts where there's at least 3 to 4 melee champions, and as a general rule of thumb, I usually run Trinity Force if I have an engaged support. However, that rule can be ignored with the exceptions of 1. If you need the item in order to win a 1v1 against champions such as Rumble, Gangplank, Irelia, etc. 2. The whole enemy draft consists of champions that go into you melee range in order to play it. Youmuu's Ghostblade. This item is specifically unique to Phase Rush setup. The reason we go Youmuu's is to allow ourselves to have good components such as lethality and more AD from the first item, since we are lacking damage from not running Conqueror, an item active to support the trading and gameplay style of Phase Rush, which is basically to mostly short trade with one-sided trades and allow us to gain distance on somebody in order to pull them in, fight them, and then run away or even chase. The lack of HP from the item isn't much of an issue, since the playstyle with the item makes you take less damage since you're allowed to move around more and get out of extended trades and fights easier. For boots on Darius, there are 3 variants you can choose from. Boots of plated steel caps. I run against drafts where there are many champions who deal most of the damage from auto attacks, and also in matchups where I'm required to rush it in order for the matchup to be more playable, such as Set, Trundle, etc. Boots of Mercury's Treads. I run against drafts where there's heavy CC and a lot of AP champions, and in matchups that need me to have the tenacity in order to win the 1v1, such as Gragas. Boots of Swiftness. I run into ranged matchups mostly that aren't easy to space against or get close to, such as Vayne, Aurora, and where the other 2 boots I mentioned earlier don't really help in lane. You can also use these boots for snowballing because they give a lot of movement speed, so they allow you to build more AD items early instead of movement speed items, but this obviously comes at the cost of lacking tenacity and magic resist for Mercury's Treads, and the armor and on-hit reduction for plated steel caps. Now that we talked about which boots to build, let's talk about when to upgrade them. There are only 3 cases I rush tier 2 boots before my first item. First, in matchups I need them to win the early trades like Set, Kled, etc. Second, to survive or contest the laning phase if the enemy top laner is a ranged champion. And third, when the enemy top laner also upgrades his boots, I match them because I won't be able to close the distance without using summoner spells in most cases. However, there is an exception to this rule, and that is when you go Phase Rush and you have Rectrix paired with tier 1 boots. This alone will allow you to somewhat match their tier 2 boots movement speed. If these 3 conditions aren't met in the game, I usually finish my tier 2 boots after my first core item. In the purchasable guide on our Patreon, I will mention in every matchup what matchup requires rushing boots and which one doesn't. Now let's talk about what we build after the core item and boots. We have a large pool of items available to us, and I will explain when and how we build them. For damage items, we have Starrax Gauge, Death Dance. For movement speed items and tanky items, we have Dead Man's Plate. Force of Nature, and Jack Show. For anti-CC and extra speed, we have Merciful Scimitar. Since the area's weakness is movement speed, you will build your items around that weakness and compensate for it. Or you can focus on building more damage if you don't need to. Let me explain. First scenario, damage items rush. In drafts where there's at least 3 champions you can hit and reach easily, you are free to build damage items like Sterak's Gauge and Death Dance after the core item, and then you can focus on movement speed and tanky items afterwards that make up for the stats your damage items don't have. Second scenario, movement speed item first into damage second. In drafts where there's less champions you can hit or reach, for example, if the enemy has 2 melee champions or less, and they have more ranged champions or mobile melees, since you will have a harder time hitting and sticking onto them, you have to prioritize building a movement speed item first like Deadman's Plate or Force of Nature to help with your mobility, before you start building a damage item like Sterak's Gauge or Death Dance. Third scenario, double movement speed item rush. In drafts that there's almost no champions you can hit or reach, and the enemy team is composed of mostly ranged champions, or only one melee champion that is also very mobile and is very hard to stick onto without proper CC or engage from your side. In that case, we have to prioritize building 2 movement speed items after the core item. However, there is an alternative to building 2 movement speed items. You can go phase rush with Youmu's as your core item, since it gives you 2 things. First, the Youmu's active ability acts as a mini ghost with a 5 tags lower cooldown, and it will allow you to get close to the mobile / high range champions to proc your phase rush, which is the second thing that would allow you to create space for your teammates and allow you to space around the enemy and chase them further. I know this was a lot to take in, so I'm going to give a couple of examples to further get my point across. First, when we rush damage items, for this example the enemy draft is composed of Jax, Diana, Tryndamere, Kai'Sa, and Thresh. This draft has 4 melee champions, and we could say it's basically pretty simple to hit every champion, so we can rush 80 items. First of all, since the enemy has 3 champions who auto attack a lot, I would build plated steel caps here since it gives really good value against Jax, Tryndamere, and Kai'Sa. Second, since a lot of the champions do hybrid damage like Jax and Kai'Sa, I would build Sterak's Gauge into Death Dance second after the core item, and that's because HP has more value over pure armor against hybrid champions. But, for example, let's say there is a Jinx instead of the Kai'Sa and a Kled instead of the Jax. In that case, it would be much safer to go Death Dance first into Sterak's Gauge second after the core item, since we're getting way more value out of the armor than we would out of the Sterak's Gauge HP. Let's get back to the original draft. Since you're going Sterak's Gauge first for the hybrid damage and Death Dance second, sometimes the pure AP champions such as Diana in this example could get extremely fed. In that case, you prioritize building Negatron Cloak, which we will later turn into a full item. You only buy a Negatron Cloak and not a full item because you have to prioritize finishing the 280 items in order to maximize the damage of your champion before you start building any defensive or movement speed items. Now, since you have armor from our Death Dance and MR from Negatron Cloak, you can build Deadman's Plate third, since it's good against the 380 champions on the enemy team and it gives you extra movement speed along with a bit of damage. And finally, I would build Jack Show last since it amplifies our current armor and MR, and also since there aren't enough AP champions to justify Force of Nature, it gives us extra MR to deal with the AP side of the enemy team. Second movement speed item into damage second. For this example, the enemy draft is composed of Aatrox, Lilia, Syndra, Jinx, and Alistar. This draft has 3 melee champions, but they're mostly mobile melees and melees who are hard to stick on like Alistar, and 2 high range champions, those being Syndra and Jinx. So to solve this problem, I build a movement speed item second that would also complement the enemy draft's higher damage type, which in this case there are 3 AP champions and 2 AD champions, so I would build a magic resist item that also gives movement speed like Force of Nature. For the third item, which is typically a damage and defense AD item, I choose between Sterak's Gauge or Death Dance. The decision depends on my boots choice in the draft. If I took plated steel caps because the matchup is difficult or the enemy AD carry is very fed, but I still need a magic resist item, I go Sterak's Gauge third. This compensates for the lack of tenacity, and with some existing armor, it holds me until I get my 4th item, usually Death Dance, to complete my AD items. If I went Mercury Treads, I can build Death Dance third. This provides balanced armor, magic resist, and damage, allowing me to get Sterak's Gauge 4th and complete my 280 items as soon as possible. For the final item, especially against champions with heavy CC like Lilia's ultimate, you have 2 options. Jack Show, if you want more tankiness, QSS, which builds later into Merciful Scimitar. If you need to prevent CC from disrupting fights, this item gives damage, magic resist, and a movement speed boost after removing CC, which complements Darius' playstyle very well. I recommend the QSS route only when it's absolutely necessary to function in the draft. You can also build it earlier if certain CCs like Malzahar's ult or Varus ult are particularly threatening. Also, if you don't need Jack Show or Merciful Scimitar, you can always opt for Deadman's Plate as your final item. It's a solid choice because it provides some damage and decent movement speed. Double movement speed item rush. For example, if the enemy draft is Jace, Zyra, Syndra, Caitlyn, and Braum, most are range, making it difficult to reach them. In this case, you want to play as a frontline or space-making champion by building resistances, HP, and movement speed. Deadman's Plate and Force of Nature are ideal for this. With this matchup, you take plated steel caps for armor and value against Caitlyn auto attacks. Since the boots provide some armor, you can build Force of Nature second and Deadman's Plate third to cover your defenses. After gaining enough resistances and mobility, you can start building AD items, Sterak's Gauge fourth, if the enemy CC is strong, followed by either Jack's Show for extra tankiness or Merciful Scimitar against CC and added mobility. The choice depends on your playstyle and how the game feels. Alternative to the movement speed rush, using phase rush can be very powerful in the same draft. The enemy's composition tries to keep you at range, so Youmuu's active lets you close the distance without burning a summoner spell, and phase rush helps you stick to targets. This allows a similar approach to the second building scenario, but more efficiently. One movement speed item, usually Force of Nature second for the plated steel caps value, then an AD item. This gives mobility damage and flexibility while keeping your summoners for important fights. After the AD item, you can either build Jack's Show fourth to continue stacking resistances, or go for a speed pick build, QSS to remove heavy CC, then Death Dance, finishing with Merciful Scimitar. This gives high damage, decent resistances, and mobility to quickly engage and one-shot targets in melee range, almost like an assassin. This playstyle differs from Conqueror Darius as it emphasizes creativity in the laning phase and playing as a space maker and pick champion rather than relying on resets on extended fights. I recommend the phase rush route over the double movement speed rush. With practice, it makes you valuable in more drafts and more versatile in team fights. Let's get into the gameplay part of Darius now. First of all, the early game. Darius is one of the strongest early game top laners in the game, which means he has lane priority in most cases. Now that said, the main focus of Darius is to maximize your gold generation and kill threats to the fullest. In the early game, I focus on creating a favorable lane state by freezing or slow pushing waves. This puts the enemy in risky situations where a bad trade could leave them vulnerable to an all-in with Ghost. I often slow push towards the enemy side because larger waves discourage enemy jungler ganks, and Darius can handle many 1v2 situations thanks to his kit and passive, which provides significant AD and extended fights. Now let's talk about trading on Darius and how it differs between Conqueror and Phase Rush. First, one rule applies to both styles. You trade mainly with your Q for poke and sustain, and you want to avoid hitting minions whenever possible so you don't break a freeze or over push the wave. Second, how you use your E pool depends on the scenario. On Conqueror, I usually either start an all-in with it after softening the enemy with short trades, or I use it to pull them back if I already started an engage with Ghost and auto attacks. With Phase Rush, the same principles apply, but I also like to use E in a short trade combo, EWQ. Some might say this burns a lot of mana, and it does, but it's worth it. The lethality components from Youmuu's make the trade very strong, and using it once every 30 to 60 seconds is enough to establish lane priority or discourage the enemy from walking up. If they do, your Q can punish them and potentially set up for an all-in. This trade pattern is not bad to do on Conqueror in scenarios where you might be diving the enemy champion, so you want to get him low faster without complications, but otherwise I don't use it often. And now let's move into the mid to late game. With Darius, I like to stay in the side lane and split push as much as possible. He peaks around level 16 with 3 items when his ultimate hits much harder and his stats make him strong and tanky. I only group around objective fights. Otherwise I focus on applying pressure into the side lane. The new turret plates help a lot here. You can instantly get at least a plate per tower and places don't disappear on towers other than the Nexus. Teleport is key too, letting me either split push longer or make surprise engages with 800 plus MS, catching someone off guard. Basically, the goal is to scale and push as much as possible until you're needed. If you're playing Phase Rush specifically, split pushing becomes even more deadlier. You can push deeper into the enemy's side, and if they try to stop you, a quick EWQ plus Phase Rush and Youmuu's active lets you escape without burning summoners. You waste their time while your team makes plays elsewhere. My success on Darius comes from knowing when to group and when to not to. This keeps my CS extremely high and ensures I don't waste summoners. Always ask yourself, is it worth investing my summoners here? Sometimes 300 gold isn't worth costing a critical 5v5. As for teamfights, if you're playing Conqueror, there are 2 main ways to approach teamfights. Focus on a single target to build your 5 stacks, then transition onto the rest of the enemies. 2. Use your R to execute a low health target and instantly get your stacks. Most of the time, you'll play patiently, and as soon as you hit 5 stacks, you look for an all-in. If Phase Rush, the approach is similar, but you have more mobility. You can speed in, pull a key enemy, land your combo, and then back off to avoid dying. You can also walk forward to bait enemies, using your mobility to escape if they engage. The goal with Phase Rush and teamfights is to create chaos. When someone makes a mistake and all that confusion, you swoop in, stack your ultimate, and go all in. As for the matchups and counter picks, it's impossible to cover every Darius matchup in one video, especially since we need to cover both Conqueror and Phaser styles, but I'll give a brief overview and some advice. For a complete guide, check out my Darius course on Patreon, which includes 50 plus matchups for both Conqueror and Phase Rush, and it will be updated monthly. Links in the description. First, Darius lacks mobility, so ranged top laners can be a problem. How you handle it depends on their spacing and how well you play around it. Even a small misstep can let you pull and chase them down, but if they play perfectly or you're isolated, it can get tough. Second, matchups that deny auto attacks or are hard to hit with Q or E like Wukong, Jax or Akali are also challenging. These are mostly skill based. It comes down to your mechanics, how you poke and trade in the waves, and how you space your autos. This is pretty much all I can cover in a YouTube video regarding Darius. I hope you found the guide helpful, and I hope it gave you a good insight into how I see and play the champion. I'll be covering all the champions I play in YouTube guide videos throughout the year, and the next one coming up will be Jax. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitch. All the links are in the description below. Also make sure to follow me on Twitter and join the Discord to catch me live and chat with the community. Bye bye.